Hello. So one of the questions I get quite often from friends and just people that I know is, how do I manage to cook so much? But what I do is I have a little routine. So every Sunday I get a piece of paper and I look through Pinterest, because during the week I've been pinning recipes. So I look through my recipes that I have collected up and I write a meal plan for probably only 4 meals, because we always have lots of things knocking about. So I only really plan 4 dinners. But I also plan to make a vat of soup. I make a batch of crackers, a hummus or some sort of dip, like a bean dip or some sort of spread dip type thing. And then I'd also make a batch of cookies or biscuits. So basically I nearly always cook more than's needed. So I would, if I cooked a lasagna for example, I wouldn't cook enough just for that night. I would cook enough for the next day's lunch. So that you cook, like I would never make a pasta sauce that only does 1 meal, never. I would always cook it and freeze a couple of portions. So that comes to my next point, which is to use your freezer. I use my freezer for everything, so I keep herbs in it because I grow herbs and vegetables and things like that, and fruit, and I freeze everything because I'm very lazy. And what I quite often do is just chuck it in an old tub and freeze whatever it is. I think you're supposed to blanch beans, but I never bother. Yeah, so that's a really good way of cutting down on your waste, but also you've got things ready. So if I buy herbs, I very rarely keep them out of the freezer. I would get home, chop them up and freeze them. And in my freezer I have, I just use a plastic bag, but each one's got the name of the herb written on it, and I just chop it up and chuck it in there. And then that way I've got loads of different herbs available to chuck into whatever I'm making, but I don't have to buy stuff every week. So I might go to the market and buy a massive wad of coriander, or cilantro it's called in America, and I would chop it up, clean it, chop it, freeze it, and then I would use that. And I would, if I knew I had a recipe that would use a little bit, I'd keep a little handful out, but generally I just freeze all of it. So for example, if we were having a lazy dinner and I was cooking oven chips, then I would not just cook oven chips. I would chop up some vegetable that's lurking at the bottom of my fridge and I would roast it, whatever it may be. I just can't bear it. That's one of the things that my mum always taught me. You don't put your oven on unless you're cooking more than one thing, because it's expensive to heat. So by roasting vegetables, for example, you could then use them in wraps. You could freeze them if you can't be bothered to do anything with them beyond that. But it does mean that you end up having food ready. So the other day I did oven chips and I roasted a butternut squash, which I've been meaning to cook, and then I had that in a wrap the next day because it was cooked and it was ready, and all I had to do was put it in the wrap. So then that makes it look like I've got a fancy wrap that I've got butternut squash in it, but actually I was going to use the oven anyway, so I might as well heat that up. But we do also have favourite dinners that I make variations of. So most weeks I do make pizza. So I make the dough and you can keep that in the fridge for the next day. So the last week I made dough and then no one wanted it for dinner. I can't remember why, but they didn't want it. So I kept it in the fridge and we had it the next day. But I make the dough because that's only pennies. I am lucky that I'm a stay-at-home mum. Well, I do work a little bit, but I'm mostly at home, so I can make the dough in the afternoon and it's ready for the evening. The other thing I often make is fajitas. So I would have mushroom fajitas, and I would grilled chicken for my husband because he likes to eat meat. We often have jacket potatoes with different fillings, and the other favourite is always pasta or a stir fry, which is basically anything that's not been eaten gets chucked in. So if I've cut peppers up for my children to snack on, then that would get tossed in the stir fry. but I also make batches on the weekend. I quite often go into batch mode, so I might make Jamie Oliver's 7 vegetable sauce. I don't know if it's on his website. I'll have a look and put the link below if I can find it. But the 7 vegetable sauce is brilliant because A, it's got loads of vegetables in it, and B, you can freeze it. And what I do is I freeze it, which is not very zero waste, but I freeze it in flat freezer bags, and then I lay them on a tray, stack them one on top of the other, and put the whole tray in the freezer and freeze them. And then when they're frozen, I stand them up like books on a bookcase. So that is really good. So I can use that sauce for a pizza sauce as the base for that. I can use it for just obviously as a pasta sauce as it is, or you can add it to, if you make like lentil meatballs, or you could add it to a curry. If you're making a curry, instead of adding a can of tomatoes, you could add that, and then obviously you've got more things. There are tomatoes in it, but instead of the can of tomatoes, it gives it more flavours. Yeah, so the other thing I've had success with is I get my daughter to make stir fry. So she's 7, and I would get all the vegetables out that I want her to chop up. She's got this special knife that's not very sharp, and then I would help her cut them if she gets stuck, but generally she doesn't. And then I would cook some noodles or use leftover rice ready to stir, and then she stir fries the lot. And she's very proud when she does that, and her brother eats it really well because he's glad that she's cooked his dinner. And the other thing I would say for cooking a lot is that I do use my slow cooker quite a lot. It's quite rare that a week goes by, even in the summer, when the slow cooker is not used. So before I was vegan, I did pulled pork, but you can do all sorts of slow cooker things, and they're really good when you know you're not going to be home until dinner time, and you don't want to have to, and you know you're going to have a long day out, for example. I would put that on in the morning before I go. So the main time I cook is either first thing in the morning when I'm getting everybody their breakfast, or often my children eat quite early because they go to bed early, and it's before my husband gets back from work. So they would eat their dinner and I would be cooking while they chat to me, because we've got an island. So they would sit at the island, eat, and I would cook, and then that gets quite a lot done. And then on a Sunday I would do a batch cook if I need to. So if you've got any other ideas, don't forget to comment down below with them, because I'm always interested in learning more tips, and I'll catch you again soon.